In the vast pantheon of Sith Lords who have cast their shadow across the galaxy, few names evoked as much mystery and intrigue as Darth Plagueis, often remembered simply as a tale told by Palpatine to seduce Anakin Skywalker to the dark side. The truth about this enigmatic figure runs far deeper than most realize. Darth Plagueis was born a moon, one of those tall, gaunt beings you might recognize from banking centers across the galaxy, with their elongated heads, sunken eyes, and thin lips. Moons aren't exactly what you'd picture when thinking of fearsome Sith Lords. They're known more for financial genius than force mastery. But perhaps that unlikely background made Plagueis all the more dangerous. Imagine a being with the natural calculating intellect of a master banker combined with the ruthless ambition of a Sith. That was Plagueis, born on the crystal world of Megiddo. He grew up surrounded by wealth and commerce. While other species might see credits as a means to pleasure or security, moons like Plagueis understood money as pure power, and power, as any Sith knows, is the ultimate currency. But how does a member of a species known for running the intergalactic banking clan become one of the most feared practitioners of the dark side? That transformation began under the tutelage of another Sith master, Darth Tenebris. Think about what Sith training must entail. It's not just lightsaber forms and force techniques. It's psychological breaking and rebuilding. It's learning to channel pain into power. It's embracing fear and hatred as tools rather than emotions to overcome. Under Tenebris, the moon who would become Plagueis endured trials we can only imagine, emerging not just as a student of the dark side, but as someone who would eventually redefine what the dark side could achieve. What made Plagueis truly unique among the Sith was his approach to the Force. While most Sith Lords viewed the Force through a lens of conquest and domination, Plagueis approached it like a scientist dissecting a new discovery. He wanted to understand the Force at its most fundamental level, not just to use it, but to truly know it, to bend its very nature to his will. This scientific mindset led Plagueis down research paths no Sith had fully explored before. He began collecting ancient texts, Sith holocrons, and artifacts that contained forgotten knowledge. His quarters likely resembled a laboratory as much as a Sith sanctuary, filled with equipment for experiments that pushed the boundaries of what was thought possible with the Force. By his side through many of these experiments was his protocol, Droid 114D. Not your typical protocol unit. This droid served as Plagueis' assistant, record keeper, and sometimes the only witness to breakthroughs that would have terrified even the most hardened Jedi Masters. Where Plagueis went, 114D followed, documenting discoveries that would never see the light of day in any scientific journal. The dark side knowledge Plagueis accumulated was vast and varied, but his obsession, the research that would eventually earn him the title, the Wise, centered on life itself. Plagueis became consumed with understanding how the Force created life, sustained it, and ended it. He wanted to master these processes, to control the very fabric of existence. This obsession wasn't purely academic. Like all Sith, Plagueis feared death. But unlike his predecessors, who sought to cheat death through ghosts, essence transfer, or other methods, Plagueis wanted to prevent death altogether. He believed that, by understanding the midi-chlorians, the microscopic life forms that connect living beings to the Force, he could unlock the secret to eternal life. Picture a Sith Lord hunched over equipment in a hidden laboratory, not building super weapons or plotting galactic conquest, but trying to coax midi-chlorians into creating life where none existed before. That was Plagueis, at the height of his research, bending the very building blocks of existence to his will. What makes this even more astonishing is the timeline of Plagueis' activities. Recent revelations place him as active during the High Republic era, a time when the Jedi Order was at its zenith. While the Jedi were building outposts across the Outer Rim and celebrating their golden age, Plagueis was already working against them from the shadows. This suggests a patience almost unfathomable to most beings. The High Republic era began around 300 BY, meaning Plagueis was implementing plans that wouldn't come to full fruition until centuries later. Imagine planting seeds you know you'll never live to see bloom. That was the Sith way under the rule of two, and Plagueis embraced it fully. During this time, Plagueis likely operated under his public persona. Many Sith Lords maintained cover identities, allowing them to move through galactic society undetected by the Jedi. Plagueis' Moon heritage provided the perfect cover. Who would suspect a banking clan executive of being one of the most powerful darkside users in the galaxy? By 132, Plagueis had taken on an apprentice of his own. This was significant not just as part of Sith tradition, but because of who this apprentice was, known only as the Stranger or Kia. This individual had once been a Jedi. Think about what that means. Not only had Plagueis managed to remain hidden from the Jedi Order, but he had successfully turned one of their own to the dark side. The transition from Jedi to Sith is never easy. It requires breaking lifelong conditioning, embracing emotions the Jedi are taught to suppress, and committing acts that violate every principle of the Jedi Code. For Plagueis to guide someone through this transformation speaks to his deep understanding of both sides of the Force and the psychology of Force users. What kind of training would a former Jedi receive under a Sith like Plagueis? Likely not just combat techniques or displays of raw power. Plagueis would have focused on reshaping his apprentices' entire worldview, teaching them to see the Force not as a guide to be followed, but as a tool to be mastered. He would have encouraged experimentation, questioning, and a willingness to break taboos the Jedi held sacred. This relationship between Plagueis and his former Jedi apprentice exemplifies something central to Sith philosophy. The Sith don't just reject the Jedi way, they actively seek to prove its inferiority by turning a Jedi, training them in the dark side, and demonstrating greater power than the Jedi could offer. Plagueis wasn't just gaining an ally. He was validating his own path. But the story of this apprentice is just one chapter in Plagueis' long game against the Jedi Order. Throughout the High Republic era and beyond, he moved pieces on the galactic board with consummate skill. Banking regulations, trade disputes, political appointments, all might seem disconnected from the Force, but in the hands of a Sith strategist like Plagueis, they were weapons as deadly as any lightsaber. Think of the Sith Lord sitting in meetings with banking clan executives, appearing to care about profit margins, while secretly undermining Republic stability, or funding explorations to find lost Sith artifacts, while ostensibly investing in archaeological research. Every action had dual purposes. Every relationship served the grand design. What made Plagueis truly formidable wasn't just his command of the Force or his scientific breakthroughs. It was his patience, his willingness to work within systems while gradually corrupting them from within. The Jedi looked for threats wielding red lightsabers and shooting lightning from their fingertips. They weren't prepared for a threat that came in the form of loan agreements and trade negotiations. This methodical approach allowed Plagueis to operate for decades, possibly centuries, without detection. While other Sith throughout history had attempted grand, dramatic gestures that exposed them to the Jedi. Plagueis understood that true power often works best when unseen. The legacy of Darth Plagueis extends far, far beyond his lifetime. His research into midi-chlorians and life creation may have had consequences even he couldn't have fully anticipated. Some speculate that his experiments may have created ripples in the Force that led to unexpected Force-sensitive births generations later. The very balance of the Force itself may have been altered by his meddling with its fundamental aspects. As we continue exploring the story of this legendary moon, we'll discover how his machinations eventually led to the downfall of the Republic and the Jedi Order. But perhaps most importantly, we'll see how Darth Plagueis, through his scientific approach to the dark side, came closer than any Sith before him to achieving the ultimate goal, victory over death itself. Plagueis wasn't just another link in the chain of Sith masters and apprentices. He represented a fundamental shift in how the Sith approached their ancient conflict with the Jedi and their relationship with the Force itself. His story is not just about darkness and power, but about innovation and vision that would reshape the galaxy for generations to come. Throughout the history of the Sith, the pursuit of immortality has been something of an obsession. From ancient lords preserving their spirits in tombs and holocrons, to others attempting to transfer their essence between bodies, cheating death has always been the ultimate expression of power over the natural order. But Darth Plagueis approached this age-old quest in a way no Sith before him had dared. While other Sith turned to ancient rituals, arcane spells, and mystical connections to the dark side, Plagueis looked through the lens of science. To him, immortality wasn't some mystical state to be achieved through meditation or dark ceremonies. It was a biological puzzle waiting to be solved. Picture a laboratory hidden away from prying eyes. Inside, a tall moon figure hunches over equipment that would baffle even the most advanced medical droids of the Republic. Specimens float in Bacta tanks. Data streams across multiple screens. This was where Plagueis conducted his most ambitious research, breaking down the very building blocks of life itself. What made his approach revolutionary was his focus on midi-chlorians, those microscopic life forms that connect all living beings to the Force, where Jedi saw midi-chlorians as a bridge between the physical and spiritual. Plagueis saw them as cellular components that could be isolated, studied, and ultimately controlled. His experiments were as numerous as they were unethical. Test subjects ranged from simple organisms to complex sentient beings. One of his most valuable subjects was actually a Sith Lord named Darth Venomous, a secret apprentice of his own master, Tenebrous. After defeating Venomous in combat, rather than killing him outright, Plagueis kept him in a comatose state for years, repeatedly subjecting him to experiments that pushed the boundaries of life and death. Think about being able to kill someone and then bring them back, not as some shambling corpse or through possession of another body, but true resurrection, cellular regeneration at its most fundamental level. This is what Plagueis achieved with Venomous, though not without limits. Each time he resurrected the Bith, the damage to his organs accumulated, until eventually even Plagueis couldn't reverse the cellular breakdown. These experiments covered a vast range of dark side applications: volition, the ability to bend others to your will; telepathy that went beyond simple mind tricks to deep manipulation of thought patterns; healing that could knit together grievous wounds; regeneration of damaged tissues and organs; and most ambitiously, life extension itself. The cornerstone of all this research was Plagueis' growing ability to influence midi-chlorians directly. Through years of study, he developed techniques to coax these microscopic entities to replicate themselves, effectively increasing their presence in living tissue. The initial attempts often ended in disaster, with uncontrolled growth killing the host as their cells essentially turned against them. But with each failure came new insights, new refinements to his techniques. Plagueis' ultimate goal went beyond merely extending his own life or healing injuries. He sought nothing less than the power to create life from nothing. Consider the ambition required to believe you could replicate what happens naturally through reproduction, but solely through the manipulation of the Force. Plagueis theorized that he could create a zygote through midi-chlorian manipulation alone, one that would theoretically produce a being with an unprecedented midi-chlorian count of 20,000 per cell, far surpassing even the most Force-sensitive beings known to the Jedi. According to the Secrets of the Sith, a text attributed to his eventual apprentice, Darth Sidious, Plagueis also explored a form of immortality through transference, a Force power that would allow him to transfer his consciousness to another body. While this approach had been attempted by Sith of old, Plagueis saw it not as a last resort, but as another scientific process to be refined and perfected. As his powers grew, so did his confidence. Plagueis began to believe he was approaching the cusp of true immortality. No Sith before him had come so close to breaking the ultimate limitation of mortal existence. The dark side seemed to bend to his will in ways that would have astounded even his former master. With such achievements came a peculiar transformation in Plagueis himself. Having mastered so many aspects of the Force that others deemed impossible, his fears narrowed to a single concern: losing the power he had accumulated. This wasn't the simple fear of death that drives most beings. It was something more specific, more refined. Plagueis didn't fear non-existence. He feared reverting to a state of limitation. This psychological shift reveals something crucial about the Sith mindset. The pursuit of power is never satisfied, never complete. Each new level of mastery only highlights what remains unachieved. For Plagueis, having tasted godlike control over life itself, the thought of returning to mortality became the only thing capable of triggering genuine dread in his cold moon heart. But this singular focus on his research and power may have blinded him to more immediate dangers. While he manipulated midi-chlorians and experimented on helpless subjects, political currents were shifting in the galaxy, and closer to home, his own apprentice was watching, learning, and plotting. Plagueis' overconfidence in his scientific achievements may have led him to believe he had transcended the vulnerability that plagued all living beings. He might have viewed himself as beyond the cycle of master and apprentice that had defined the Sith for a millennium, seeing his research as too valuable, too revolutionary, to be interrupted by something as mundane as betrayal. This delusion would prove costly. For all his genius in unraveling the mysteries of life, Plagueis failed to recognize a much simpler truth: power attracts those who would take it. And sometimes, the greatest threat isn't found in the grand mysteries of the Force, but in the ambitions of those closest to us. The legacy of Plagueis' research would extend far beyond his own timeline. His discoveries about manipulation, his experiments in life creation, and his pursuit of biological immortality would cast long shadows over galactic events yet to come. Knowledge that dangerous is rarely lost completely, especially when an attentive apprentice has been watching every move, cataloging every breakthrough, and planning how such powers might serve different ambitions. And now, in the story of Darth Plagueis, it is finally time to introduce his infamous apprentice. Every great Sith Master eventually selects an apprentice to carry on their knowledge and ambitions. For Darth Plagueis, that choice would alter the course of galactic history in ways even he couldn't fully foresee. Around 65, Plagueis turned his attention to a young human from Naboo, man whose potential in the dark side practically radiated for those with the sensitivity to detect it. His name was Sheev, Palpatine. At approximately 19 years old, Palpatine possessed raw talent and a natural affinity for the dark side that made him an ideal candidate to become the next link in the Sith chain. When Plagueis bestowed upon him the title of Darth Sidious, he wasn't simply following tradition. He was making a calculated investment in the future of the Sith Order, one that would ultimately pay dividends beyond his wildest expectations. The relationship between a Sith Master and apprentice is fundamentally different from that of the Jedi, where Jedi Masters seek to guide and nurture. Sith Lords push and test, constantly challenging their apprentices to grow stronger through conflict and pain. Plagueis was no exception, subjecting Sidious to rigorous training that would have broken lesser beings. Yet what made their partnership unique was the depth of knowledge Plagueis shared with Sidious. The Moon didn't simply train his apprentice. In lightsaber combat or basic force techniques, he revealed the full scope of his scientific research, his theories about midi-chlorians, and his experiments in life manipulation. This level of openness was unusual among the Sith, who typically withheld crucial knowledge as insurance against betrayal. Together, the two devoted themselves to dual pursuits, unlocking the secrets of immortality and executing the grand Sith plan to replace the Republic with a new Sith Empire. These weren't separate goals, but intertwined ambitions. What good would it be to rule the galaxy if that rule was limited by mortality? And what use was eternal life if spent hiding in the shadows? Plagueis instructed Sidious in the philosophy that had guided the Sith for a millennium, the Rule of Two, established by Darth Bane around 1000 BBY. This doctrine held that there should be only two Sith at any time, a master to embody power and an apprentice to crave it. Plagueis explained how this approach had preserved their order while the Jedi grew complacent in their numerical superiority. But Plagueis' interpretation of the Rule of Two had evolved beyond Bane's original vision. He viewed himself as potentially the culmination of this tradition, perhaps even the Sithari, the perfect being of Sith prophecy. In their private conversations, Plagueis suggested to Sidious that they might eventually transcend the cycle of master and apprentice altogether, ruling side by side for eternity once they achieved immortality. This deviation from orthodox Sith teaching revealed Plagueis' growing confidence in his research. He genuinely believed he was approaching a breakthrough that would render the traditional succession of Sith power obsolete. Why maintain a system designed to ensure the Sith's survival across generations if generations themselves became irrelevant? The partnership between Plagueis and Sidious extended beyond philosophical discussions and laboratory work. Operating under his public persona, likely as the influential banking clan figure, Higo Damask orchestrated Palpatine's political rise with meticulous care. In 52 BBY, Palpatine was elected as the Senator of Naboo and the rest of the Charmel sector, a position that placed him at the heart of the Republic they sought to undermine. Consider the audacity of their plan. While most beings worry about their next meal or promotion, these two Sith Lords were executing a strategy spanning decades, methodically positioning pieces on the galactic board with the patience of master strategists. Plagueis worked behind the scenes, leveraging his financial connections and influence, while Sidious presented a flawless public facade as a dedicated public servant. Even after Palpatine's election to the Senate, Plagueis continued to mentor his apprentice, helping him refine the political skills that would eventually elevate him to Supreme Chancellor. Their relationship during this period differed markedly from later Sith dynamics. Plagueis treated Sidious more as a partner than a subordinate, especially as their plan gained momentum. This approach stands in stark contrast to how Sidious would later treat his own apprentices, where Plagueis shared knowledge openly. Sidious would compartmentalize and restrict information, where Plagueis discussed his vision of two Sith ruling together. Sidious would maintain strict hierarchical control. These differences hint at how each Lord viewed the ultimate purpose of the Sith Order. For Plagueis, the goal appeared to be transcendence, free from the limitations that had constrained the Sith for millennia. His scientific mindset led him to view power as a means to greater discovery. But for Sidious, power itself was the objective, the accumulation and exercise of control for its own sake. This fundamental difference in philosophy would have profound implications for their partnership. As Sidious established himself in the Senate, he began to grasp the full potential of political power combined with mastery of the dark side. The lessons Plagueis had taught him about manipulation and patience found perfect application in the corrupt halls of the Republic. Senators, diplomats, and eventually even Jedi would fall under the influence of the charming, seemingly honest politician from Naboo, never suspecting the darkness that lay beneath his carefully constructed persona. The training Plagueis provided wasn't limited to politics or force techniques. He also instructed Sidious in the ancient lore of the Sith, knowledge preserved through holocrons and texts recovered from forgotten temples and tombs. This education gave Sidious a perspective few beings in the galaxy possessed, an understanding of how the constant struggle between light and dark had shaped civilization itself. Their collaboration approached its peak when Plagueis revealed to Sidious his most ambitious experiment yet. The Moon believed he was on the verge of directly influencing midi-chlorians to create life, potentially bringing into existence a being of unprecedented force sensitivity. What Plagueis couldn't know was how this revelation would factor into his apprentice's calculations throughout their years together. Plagueis had observed Sidious' growth with the pride of a master seeing his work flourish, but he failed to recognize a crucial truth about his apprentice. Sidious had internalized the Sith teachings perhaps too well. The human had embraced completely the idea that the apprentice must eventually overcome the master, not as some distant eventuality, but as an active goal to be achieved at the optimal moment. As Plagueis shared more of his research and power, he unwittingly accelerated this timeline. The more godlike Plagueis became in his abilities, the more urgently Sidious felt the need to claim that power for himself. The very success of their partnership contained the seeds of its destruction, a paradox worthy of Sith philosophy itself. Their relationship exemplified the fundamental contradiction at the heart of the rule of two. The master must train the apprentice to be powerful enough to continue the Sith legacy, but not powerful enough to pose an immediate threat. The apprentice must learn all they can from the master while preparing for the inevitable confrontation. It's a delicate balance that has preserved the Sith for a millennium, but also ensured their existence is defined by betrayal. What made Plagueis vulnerable wasn't a lack of power or foresight, but perhaps an excess of ambition. In his quest to transcend the limitations of mortality, he began to believe he could also transcend the fundamental nature of the Sith relationship. He envisioned a future where he and Sidious would rule together, eternally breaking the cycle. that had defined their order for 1,000 years. It was a beautiful vision, but one that failed to account for the human nature of his apprentice. Sidious had not been trained to share power, but to seize it. He had not been molded to cooperate, but to dominate. The very qualities that made him an ideal Sith apprentice made him incapable of embracing Plagueis' revolutionary vision of partnership. As Sidious solidified his position in the Senate and began to form connections with key figures across the galaxy, the dynamics of their relationship shifted subtly. The student was becoming the master in ways Plagueis might have recognized, had he not been so focused on his research into immortality. The political web Sidious was weaving complemented the scientific breakthroughs Plagueis was achieving, a synergy that accelerated their grand plan. But beneath this productive collaboration, currents of ambition and calculation were flowing in directions Plagueis couldn't fully perceive. The apprentice was evaluating the master, measuring his usefulness, assessing his vulnerabilities, and waiting for the perfect moment to make his move. The story of Plagueis and Sidious reminds us that in the realm of the Sith, even the most powerful can be blind to the danger closest to them. While Plagueis looked to the stars and dreamed of eternal life, his greatest threat was sitting across from him, absorbing his knowledge, adapting his techniques, and planning for a future where there would be no need for a master anymore. 2. Fully grasp the relationship between Plagueis and Sidious, we need to take a step back and examine the philosophy that governed the Sith Order for a millennium. The Rule of Two wasn't just a tradition or a suggestion. It was the fundamental principle that reshaped the Sith after their near extinction around 1000 BBY. In the aftermath of the devastating Jedi-Sith War, the Sith Order lay in ruins, decimated, their power fractured, and their future uncertain. From these ashes rose a visionary Sith Lord named Darth Bane, who looked at the destruction of his order and saw not just failure but opportunity. Bane recognized something his fellow Sith had missed. Their greatest weakness wasn't the Jedi, but themselves. The old Sith Empire had been plagued by constant infighting, backstabbing, and power struggles. Lesser Sith formed alliances against stronger ones. Apprentices conspired prematurely against masters. The dark side itself seemed to foster this self-destructive behavior. So Bane made a radical decision. He eliminated the remaining Sith Lords and decreed that henceforth there would be only two Sith at any given time, a master and an apprentice. This wasn't just a practical measure to avoid detection by the Jedi. It was a philosophical revolution that addressed the fundamental nature of the dark side itself. The dark side of the Force thrives on passion, ambition, and the will to power. These qualities, while sources of strength, also naturally lead to conflict when too many Sith gather. By limiting their number to two, Bane channeled these destructive tendencies into a constructive framework. In crafting this new doctrine, Bane drew inspiration from an ancient Force concept, the dyad. A Force dyad occurs when two Force-sensitive beings share an unbreakable bond, becoming essentially one in the Force while remaining two separate individuals. While the Rule of Two doesn't create such a literal connection, it mimics the dyad structure to beings united in purpose yet distinct in role. Under the Rule of Two, the master's duty was to accumulate knowledge and power, then pass it on to a worthy apprentice. The apprentice's duty was to learn everything the master had to teach, then, when the moment was right, to destroy the master and take their place. This brutal succession ensured that each generation of Sith would be stronger than the last, as only those who could surpass their masters would survive to continue the line. Think about what this means in practice. Unlike the Jedi who sought to support and elevate their Padawans, Sith masters faced a constant dilemma. They needed to train their apprentices to be powerful enough to continue the Sith legacy, but not so powerful that they posed an immediate threat. Meanwhile, apprentices had to learn all they could while hiding their growing strength until they were ready to challenge their master. This created a relationship defined by calculation, suspicion, and inevitable betrayal. Master and apprentice might work together for decades, might even develop a form of respect or attachment, but both always knew how their relationship was destined to end. The rule of two transformed betrayal from a moral failing into a sacred duty, a necessary step in the evolution of their order. The genius of Bane's system was that it aligned the natural Sith impulse for domination with a structure that ensured survival and ensured legacy, the natural tendencies of the Sith ambition, domination, ruthless competition were perfectly aligned with the long-term survival of their order under the rule of two. Every Sith knew their role. They also knew the cost of failure. If a master grew complacent or weak, they'd be replaced. If an apprentice moved against their master too soon, they'd be destroyed. It was a system that regulated itself, and it worked. Only the strongest, most cunning Sith could advance the legacy. But this wasn't just about fighting or mastering Force powers. The constant testing and refinement applied to everything: strategy, politics, manipulation, science, and the deepest secrets of the dark side. Every generation wasn't just expected to preserve what came before, they were expected to expand it, build on it, improve it. That's what made the Sith evolve. The rule of two also solved a bigger problem: secrecy. With only two Sith in existence at any one time, they could stay hidden, influencing events without detection. The Jedi weren't looking for a threat that didn't announce itself. The Sith used this cloak of invisibility as a weapon. It let them work from the shadows, planning the fall of the Republic and the Jedi Order over centuries, while their enemies remained blind to the danger. For 1,000 years, this system worked. From Darth Bane to his apprentice Zana, and through generations of masters and apprentices whose names are now lost to history, Sith knowledge was passed down like a sacred torch, one that burned brighter with every Handoff. Meanwhile, the Jedi assumed the Sith were extinct. That illusion of peace allowed the Sith to grow stronger, more cunning, more dangerous. By the time the line reached Darth Plagueis, the rule of two had done more than just preserve the Sith, had turned them into masters of manipulation, power, and secrecy. The stage was set. The Jedi would fall. The Republic would fall. The Sith Empire would rise. But every system, no matter how brilliant, carries within it the potential for change. The rule of two created increasingly powerful individuals, and those individuals eventually began to question the system itself. Plagueis, with his sharp mind and revolutionary work in immortality, began to ask, if death could be beaten, what was the point of having apprentices at all? Why keep the tradition of killing the master if no one ever had to die? If two Sith could live forever growing in knowledge and power side by side, why waste time on betrayal? Why not evolve beyond it? These weren't idle thoughts. These were real questions Plagueis asked himself, and they shaped how he trained Darth Sidious. But what Plagueis didn't fully realize was that the rule of two had already taken deep root in Sidious's mind. He'd absorbed the spirit of Bane's philosophy completely. Sidious didn't just see the rule of two as a numbers game or a way to hide. To him, it was the backbone of what made the Sith strong. Conflict, succession, survival of the fittest. That was the heart of the Sith. And so, while master and apprentice worked together toward a shared vision of the future. They were ultimately walking to very different paths. Plagueis believed in partnership. Sidious believed in domination. Neither one fully understood where the other was heading until it was too late. In truth, their relationship was the rule of two at its most perfected. Two powerful minds, two brilliant Sith, equal in many ways, but bound by a rule that ensured their partnership couldn't last. That tension is what makes their story so important. It shows how the rule of two pushes the Sith forward, while also ensuring they're constantly on the edge of tearing themselves apart. So, as we keep following the story of Darth Plagueis, remember this: every alliance in the Sith tradition is temporary. Every bond is a countdown. Because under the rule of two, today's partner is tomorrow's target. And now, we arrive at one of the most fascinating parts of Plagueis' journey, his discovery of something ancient, powerful, and deeply misunderstood: the doctrine of the dyad. While the rule of two was a carefully constructed Sith doctrine, the Force dyad was something entirely different. It wasn't an idea or a belief. It was a phenomenon. A bond between two Force-sensitive individuals, so strong, so deep, that they became one within the Force while remaining two separate beings. It wasn't something you could just create. It had to occur naturally. The Force had to will it. Ancient texts described this connection as being as strong as life itself. For Plagueis, obsessed with controlling life, extending it, mastering it, this was irresistible. If two people could merge their Force signatures, could that connection survive even if one of them died? Could it become a path to immortality? Plagueis, with his scientific mind, saw the parallels. In normal biology, two genetic sources combine to make something new. Maybe, he thought, the Force worked the same way on a metaphysical level. Maybe two Force wielders could combine into something greater. Armed with this theory, Plagueis decided to try something no Sith had ever done before: create a Force dyad with his apprentice, Darth Sidious. This wasn't just bold, it was unheard of. It meant attempting to form the most intimate bond possible with his apprentice, not just training him, not just trusting him, merging with him on a level even the Jedi had never achieved. This tells us a lot about Plagueis. It shows not just his confidence, but his blind spot. He believed too much in his control, and perhaps he misunderstood who Sidious really was. The process likely involved ancient rituals, obscure Force techniques, forgotten knowledge. We know from Sidious's own writings in the Secrets of the Sith that the attempts happened, but the details are lost. What's not lost is the outcome: total failure. Sidious later dismissed the whole thing, saying Plagueis, though wise, was unworthy of such a bond. He wasn't impressed. In fact, it probably confirmed everything he already thought. His master was reaching beyond his limits. Maybe Sidious actively resisted. Maybe he knew that such a bond would give Plagueis too much power over him. Whatever the reason, it didn't work, and it marked a turning point. For Plagueis, it was a rare defeat. For Sidious, it was a sign that his master's reach exceeded his grasp. Sidious came to see the rule of two not as the ultimate system, but as a half measure, a compromise. He believed the dyad, had it worked, would have been stronger, but since it didn't, he doubled down on Bane's old ways: strict hierarchy, secrecy, and power for its own sake. Plagueis wanted connection. Sidious wanted control. And that's what makes this failed dyad attempt so important. Generations later, a true dyad would naturally emerge between Rey and Ben Solo. A connection born not of domination, but of balance, of light and dark, of harmony, the very thing the Sith were incapable of creating, because the dyad can't be forced. It can't be manipulated into existence. It has to arise through the will of the Force, and that's the Sith's blind spot. They don't bend to the Force, they bend the Force to their will. And some things simply can't be bent. For all his brilliance, Plagueis couldn't grasp that, and it left a crack in his worldview. One he tried to patch with more experiments, more research, more control. If he couldn't achieve immortality through metaphysical means, he'd return to science. Back to the midi-chlorians, back to the lab. Meanwhile, Sidious watched. He didn't need to believe in the dyad. He didn't even need it to work. What mattered was what he learned from watching his master fail. Sidious took what worked, discarded what didn't, refined his own path, and so their relationship evolved. Plagueis, perhaps sensing the danger, leaned more into the idea of ruling together, trying to persuade Sidious to share his vision. Sidious played along, pretended to be the loyal apprentice, but inside he was planning, calculating, waiting. The tragic irony is this: the more Plagueis tried to transcend the Sith way, the more Sidious embraced it. The master wanted change, the apprentice wanted tradition. Neither truly saw the other clearly until the moment of betrayal arrived. The dyad may have failed, but it revealed everything about who these two Sith really were. Plagueis, the innovator; Sidious, the perfectionist. One reached too far, the other waited too long, and as they continued down their shared path, master and apprentice, united in purpose, but divided in vision, the end was already written. They just didn't know it yet. The partnership between Darth Plagueis and Darth Sidious had been more productive than either could have achieved alone. Together, they had advanced Sith knowledge, especially in the realm of midi-chlorian manipulation, and positioned themselves strategically within galactic politics. Sidious had risen to prominence in the Senate, while Plagueis operated from the shadows, likely using his influence in banking and finance to push forward their shared agenda. But the rule of two contains within it an inevitable conclusion: the apprentice must eventually challenge the master. This isn't just tradition or some Sith superstition, the very mechanism by which the Sith ensure their evolution. And for all his brilliance, for all his attempts to transcend Sith limitations, Plagueis remained blind to the most basic truth of the order he served. Apprentices are meant to surpass their masters. As Sidious absorbed more and more of Plagueis' knowledge, a shift began to take place in their dynamic. The Moon Sith Lord became increasingly consumed by his research into immortality and the creation of life. His focus shifted toward the laboratory, while Sidious honed his skills in manipulation, deception, and the careful accumulation of political power. They were walking different paths toward the same ultimate goal: control. There came a point when Sidious realized he had learned everything of value that his master could teach him. The scientific principles behind midi-chlorian manipulation, the ancient Sith rituals, the subtle uses of the Force for manipulation and control had been mastered by the ambitious apprentice. More importantly, Sidious had begun to see his master's flaws. Where Plagueis viewed scientific discovery as an end in itself, Sidious recognized it only as a means to power. Where Plagueis dreamed of eternal life shared between two Sith Lords, Sidious envisioned himself as the sole eternal emperor of the galaxy. The philosophical gap between them had grown too wide to bridge. Plagueis had become, in Sidious's cold assessment, a distraction. The master was focused on experiments and theory, while the real work of undermining the Republic and defeating the Jedi was progressing through Sidious's political maneuvering. What use was a partner who had retreated into academic pursuits when the practical application of Sith power was finally within reach? The decision, when it came, was likely made with the same calculating precision Sidious brought to all his endeavors. In accordance with the rule of Tuther, very tradition that Plagueis himself had taught him, Sidious determined it was time to claim the title of master for himself. The actual moment of betrayal was shockingly simple, considering how monumental it was in the history of the Sith. Sidious broke into his master's private apartment while Plagueis slept. No dramatic lightsaber duel, no booming displays of force power, no final confrontation of ideals or philosophies. The man who had become emperor struck while his victim was completely vulnerable. This method of assassination says everything about Sidious. He didn't care about proving he was stronger in open combat. He had no interest in validating his power through a duel. Sidious cared only for results, for efficiency, for the cold, practical reality of succession. Plagueis had outlived his usefulness, so Plagueis had to die. It was that simple. The exact method of the murder remains somewhat vague in official records. Some accounts suggest force lightning, others imply a more direct attack. But what matters is the outcome, the death of one of the most knowledgeable and powerful Sith Lords in history, not in battle, but in his sleep. The irony of Plagueis' death cannot be overstated. He had devoted his life to conquering death itself. He may have even believed he had achieved some version of immortality through midi-chlorian research. And yet, he was struck down in the most mundane, almost pitiful way imaginable. All his knowledge, all his power, all his scientific breakthroughs rendered meaningless in a moment of complete vulnerability. As Sidious would later reflect, Plagueis simply didn't act fast enough to prevent his own demise. The master who could manipulate life at the most fundamental level failed to see the threat sitting right across from him until it was far too late. After the murder, Sidious assumed not only the title of Sith Master, but full control over their grand plan. The vision of two Sith ruling side by side for eternity died with Plagueis. In its place emerged Sidious's more orthodox, more brutal approach. One master, supreme and unchallenged, with apprentices who served only until they became liabilities. Plagueis' death became a formative lesson for Sidious, one that shaped his entire approach to power. He saw his master's trust as a fatal mistake, a weakness he vowed never to repeat. Where Plagueis had shared his knowledge freely, Sidious would guard it. Where Plagueis had envisioned partnership, Sidious insisted on dominance. Where Plagueis had once let down his guard, Sidious would remain vigilant always. This perspective would explain much about how Sidious treated his own apprentices, especially Darth Vader. He never viewed Vader as a true partner. He never shared everything. He never let his guard down. The memory of how easily he had disposed of his own trusting master served as a constant reminder. With Plagueis gone and his position as the sole Sith Master secured, Sidious pressed forward with their plan to destroy the Jedi and take over the Republic. But now, everything moved on his terms. The scientific exploration of midi-chlorian manipulation and immortality continued, but only as one part of a broader strategy that revolved around political power rather than force mastery. One question has long fascinated scholars of Sith history. Did Plagueis truly die that night? Considering his advanced research into immortality and consciousness preservation, some have speculated that he may have found a way to survive in some form. Could his essence have lingered, waiting to influence events from beyond death? It's an intriguing theory, but so far, there's no concrete evidence to support it. By all official accounts, Sidious's assassination was complete. Plagueis, all his brilliance, for all his knowledge of life and deaths, come to the very mortality he sought to overcome. The ultimate limitation he spent his life trying to defeat eventually claimed him, just as it does all who chase that impossible goal. But the true legacy of Plagueis doesn't lie in some secret survival. It lies in the knowledge and techniques. He developed knowledge that lived on through his apprentice. Sidious would go on to refine and apply Plagueis' work in his own pursuit of immortality. The midi-chlorian experiments, the studies in life creation, the theories about consciousness transfer, they all continued not with the same scientific care, then certainly with even greater ambition, in the years after Plagueis' death. As Sidious orchestrated the Clone Wars, executed Order 66, and formed the Galactic Empire, he occasionally reflected on his former master, not with nostalgia or remorse, but with cold, calculating detachment. Plagueis had been brilliant, but flawed, powerful, but ultimately vulnerable, a visionary but blind to the danger sitting beside him. The story of Darth Plagueis didn't end with a final battle or a tragic fall. It ended with quiet, calculated betrayal, Sith pragmatism in its purest form. The apprentice had surpassed the master, as the rule of two demanded. The cycle continued. The weaker fell, the stronger rose. The Sith evolved. And yet, in those final moments, perhaps, just perhaps, as Sidious stood over the body of the only being who had ever truly been his teacher, he felt something unexpected, not pride, not triumph, but respect. Plagueis had been a worthy teacher, a brilliant mind, a true Sith Lord. His death had been necessary, but that didn't erase what he had given to the cause. In that moment of respect, if it truly occurred, we see a rare glimpse into the complex nature of Sith relationships. Beyond betrayal, beyond ambition, there is a kind of bond, a lineage stretching back over 1,000 years. Every master, every apprentice, every lesson passed down, each link essential to the whole. Plagueis' body may have died that night, but his legacy, his discoveries, his influence, they lived on through Sid. And in that way, perhaps he achieved a kind of immortality, after all, not through midi-chlorian manipulation or consciousness transfer, but in the far more ancient, more human way, by passing down knowledge to the next generation, not the godlike, eternal life he sought, but something else, something simpler, the immortality of legacy. When you strip away all the power, all the knowledge, all the grand schemes, what's left of Darth Plagueis? A brilliant mind, a Sith Lord who came closer than any before him to breaking the final boundary between life and death, a man who tried to rewrite the rules of the Sith, a scientist who saw the Force not as something to worship, but as something to master, and in the end a corpse, murdered in his sleep by the apprentice he raised and trusted. His research lived on, his discoveries changed the galaxy, through Sidious, through Vader, through the fall of the Republic and the rise of the Empire. The fingerprints of Darth Plagueis are everywhere, even in the final confrontation between Rey and a resurrected Sidious. The shadow of the long-dead Moon Sith Lord loomed large. But maybe the real question we should ask isn't what Plagueis discovered, or how he died. Maybe it's this: in his relentless pursuit of eternal life, did Darth Plagueis ever truly live,